talking about criticism to independent filmmakers, do you feel obligated to give them something positive if you know that, like you were saying, it's the beginning of their filming career? You do, whether you take that into account or not, do you feel it important to say anything positive about a film when criticizing it?
I think you have to say something positive, even if it's a bad film. Even if you didn't like it, you can find something positive. Well, I have seen 1 or 2 movies that I found nothing positive in on the independent side, but it's rare, and those you just kind of bite your tongue. But I think any movie that somebody does, you can find something positive.
You really cut up the documentary on My Third Honeymoon.
It was a movie called Front Porch.
I did not like the ending.
But I think there are plenty of reviewers out there. I think there are plenty of reviewers out there that don't care if they say anything positive at all. Yeah. So I think it's nice that you try to find something positive, or the thing in it that was most successful.
For an independent.
Especially for an independent. Because it's so hard for anybody to make a movie, even if you have $200 million in the bank to do it. It's so difficult. So it is nice for someone that they regard as someone to say something positive about their work, you know.
Do you approach documentaries, that genre, differently than you would a theatrical film? And how much does the subject of the documentary and how you feel about that documentary influence how you critique the movie?
Well, it depends, because documentaries are an interesting little monster, because part of it is after, sort of like in a post Michael Moore world, who really kind of manufactures a little more than he really should. Right. And then you've got like imitators like Morgan Spurlock, who does kind of the same thing and kind of comes with a definitive view that sort of is different than the old-fashioned documentary where it's like, we're going to film this.
Talking heads and blah, blah, blah.
And whatever happens. So there's a little bit of leeway with the documentary, because it doesn't always have a great ending. It doesn't always resolve, and it doesn't quite always follow a plot. So I think you've got to take that differently. But again, I've always said good filmmaking is good filmmaking. I've seen bad documentaries, and you're just like, that's just not well constructed, and it doesn't work. And if it's coming with such a specific opinion, and it's trying to, take something like Waiting for Superman.
That was the one I was just thinking of. Absolutely, yeah.
Which
I'm down on it because I don't like what they did in the movie.
Well, what bothers me about Waiting for Superman isn't it's the
You're
fact
brilliant.
that
You are brilliant.
that I figured out that that's what you're talking. Well, thank you, Clay. But at the very end, it's very clear. It just becomes an ad for charter schools, and it takes off all pretense of being, we're going to find this from a documentary perspective, and it says, here's what we're trying to say. This is what we were all leading up to. And I think that's having greater impact even in Ohio with budgetary issues, and it's
they showed it. The governor showed it to a select number of people.
And I think that there's a lot of flaws in there, and that's the problem with approaching a documentary with a point of view to make a point.
That's tough not to.
It's very tough not to.
It's having an agenda it changes the nature of what you're doing. I mean,
Well, because the nature of documentary, you get hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of footage, and you have to make decisions. And if you know what you're going to say beforehand, you're just like, I don't need that. Let's get rid of all that.
You can omit the facts because you don't feel like showing them.
or the ones,
And in a sense, it's no more true than the theatrical film can speak truth.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Documentaries, because they're documentaries, doesn't mean they're more true.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we know that.
Yeah.
Not everybody knows that.
Yeah.
But
And we're a
again,
select few.
talking about how important do you think criticism is to an independent filmmaker? Let's start with Kelly on this
Well,
one.
do you mean once their film is done, how
Yeah.
to get it out there, to get it seen?
How important is it for, let's just take, for example, you have an independent filmmaker somewhere in Ohio that made a film, they sent it to you as a critic to review it. How important is it your criticism to them?
Oh, I think very important. I think, well, you guys, and I can't remember if it was here, but we were talking about film, like pulling quotes from reviews and things. Even if they're good or bad, a quote on a poster or on a DVD cover, most, Jack and Jane thinks, oh, that movie, that's worthy of review. A reviewer saw that, and good or bad. So an independent film, if I'm going to review it and people listen to me, as I hope they do, good or bad, I think that's helpful, I mean, isn't that what we're saying? I mean, so.
But that's very true, and that's a really good point. But what about the actual criticism itself? How important is that to the independent filmmaker?
Oh, I think it's constructive. I think it's helpful. You're giving me a
I
look.
I just think it depends on the filmmaker. Some people
sure.
will think that what they have is gold no matter what criticism they receive, and some people will take the criticism to heart and say, well, I need to look at my film a little differently. So I think it depends on the filmmaker, and depends on
how open they are to it.
Yeah. And
I think some filmmakers need to be, if they got a bad film or they've got problems, they need to be at least told they have problems.
Sure.
Because again, these are people that are starting out.
Hopefully going on from that.
And if they're smart, they'll say, "Oh, that's only Clay Lowe, or that's only Kevin, or that's only Kelly."
It's very, very hard to take criticism of your work, and you live with a film, and you make a film, and you spend a lot of time and money, and you've mortgaged your life sometimes on these things.
Mm-hmm.
And then if somebody's like, "Yeah, it wasn't that good," it hurts. I mean, it stings.
Sure.
But sometimes you need to have that happen, even if you're not going to take it to heart. I think it's important. If you want to really honestly be a filmmaker and you want to break out beyond the independent realm and even just beyond the grassroots independent realm, you need to hear criticism because, I mean, so what? Your mom loves it. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah,
great.
But, and that's good to have that. It's good to have that support system. But if no one's telling you this isn't good, you need to change this. This is terrible. This has been done a million times or whatever. Even in the most constructive way, it's important for some people to hear that. I think everybody needs to hear that.
But some people, some critics enjoy trashing a film because it's so much fun to trash a film.
Right.
Oh,
But I don't usually trash a film.
Sure,
I
I'll
don't
trash
usually
films
do
all
that.
the time. Well, and I think if you get a movie that's like outside of the independent realm, but even in the studio realm, if you're getting something from like The Asylum, and you're doing Mega Shark versus Giant Octopus 2, you can look at it and be like, they're not trying to make something fantastic. They're just making a schlocky movie, and I take that into consideration. So I think you can take into consideration a lot of things surrounding it.
Well, we faced something similar with Ain't It Cool News, didn't we?
Right.
Do tell.
Yes, we did. What do you want to say about that?
Just tell the story.
So
go for it.
their initial review was.
Well, I mean, we sent a copy of our movie.
We dropped it off at Drew McQueenie. I dropped it off at Drew McQueenie's doorstep when we were in L.A. And lo and behold, a review showed up. I don't know how long later. And
6-7 weeks.
Yeah. And then what happened?
The first review was they destroyed the movie. They just said...
Was it Drew who reviewed it?
No.
Shall we say the title of the film that we're discussing?
Well, it's Horrors of War.
Okay.
Is the name of the film.
Trying not to
Which is it's a super 16 millimeter blended genre film, sci-fi action horror war movie.
What it comes down to is they got this movie and they said, this is low budget crap, we hate it. And then, after you feel like somebody punched you and you couldn't breathe, we both did something that most filmmakers should do that don't, is we wrote thank you emails. It's totally independent of each other. We wrote thank you emails to the guy who wrote it.
Well, and we explained a little bit more about our approach.
Our intent with the movie was to make a B movie. The kind of thing that we used to see, I used to see with, the old midnight movie hosts, kind of like what Fritz the Night Owl would do. We made a movie that's an homage to that genre.
You're kind of, right.
A love letter to what we grew up with.
Like Planet Terror is an homage to the B-movie genre. We did the same thing 2 years before.
Okay.
And the problem was they had no way of knowing that. We were independent filmmakers from nowhere. And so all they had was a movie.
This is Columbus, Ohio.
That's right.
Well, that's true.
But apparently in Austin, that huge mecca called Austin didn't realize
They just don't know. They don't know Columbus. Columbus is good.
Well, they read our letters, and he went back and he said
Re-reviewed it.
He re-reviewed it, and he said, with understanding everything that we were trying to do with the film, he had a totally different review and said, on that level, it was successful.
Yeah. And I guess that's from a filmmaker standpoint, especially independent, because sometimes the only way you're going to get yourself reviewed, you can put it in as many festivals as you want to, but that doesn't mean anyone's going to review it.
Right.
You got to send out copies.
screener.
And I still suggest, I don't send them out blindly unless it's like a press outlet or something like that. But maybe contact a reviewer and say, hey, will you do this? And send them a screener. Don't say, oh, it's on Vimeo or YouTube or something like that, because they're not going to watch it that way. Give them a DVD and let them watch it. But at least put it in context. But you got to reach out to them, and you have to do your due diligence that way. And some that are like it, some that don't, maybe.
Well, and what we did was, was a thank you note. It was like, thank you for just reviewing it, because to get mentioned on Ain't It Cool News, whether your movie is good or bad, or it's reviewed with it's got a good review or bad review, is huge to be mentioned on that website.
Even if they trash it, it's like, this movie was at least worth watching. You know, I mean, and again, so many filmmakers, making a film is like having a child. It's your baby. You care about this thing you made so much. But the problem is, when it comes to criticism, you may not be open to it, or at least understanding of, you know, it's okay that some people don't like your movie, right?
I would say the greatest piece of advice I could give any filmmaker, and I'm not even just talking independents, I mean, Michael Bay and Kevin Smith could learn from this as well, is that if somebody doesn't like your movie, just get your review, take a review and go. Don't fight the review. Don't call names. Don't
and don't go have a boxing match like Uwe Boll.
Yeah. Well, here's an interesting story. I actually challenged Uwe Boll to an eating contest, and his publicist refused, because I was like, well, you know, boxing, you boxed in college, so do something that I can be on my same level as these. But no, I think you need to learn to just take a review. An interesting story. I used to write for Film Threat online, and I had reviewed a movie, and it was a short film that they put in, and Chris Gore, the editor, sent it to me, and it was in a big stack of them. And I didn't like it. Wrote the review, it was up, and then the filmmaker contacted Chris and was like, this was in the Ohio Independent Film Festival, and I looked at my program, and the guy who reviewed your movie also had a film in the film festival, and I won this award, and he's doing it to get back at me. And Chris writes me, he's like, is this true? And I'm like, I pulled out my program, and there's the thing. I'm like, well, I guess it was. I know now, but I didn't do it because I was out of venom or anything, and the guy looked like just a giant jerk.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, again, it's like for the indie filmmaker, any review you get, even if it's the worst review ever done, you should say thank you.
And you get it, yeah, because you get ink and you get covered.
Right.
It's not only there's no such thing as bad press, as much as this person took the time to watch and write about your movie, as opposed to ignore it, which I think is far worse.
Right, because someone then saw that and said, oh, well, you know, I don't necessarily always agree with this guy or whatever. That sounds interesting. I think I would like to see that.
Or
that
they
person now
say,
has an impression of your film. You know, they're aware of it.
oh yeah, or they say, well, if it's that bad, I've got to see it.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't do that for a local film. I would use different standards when I'm reviewing studio stuff and when I'm reviewing stuff. You know, if it's really, really bad, I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to pick out the stuff that I'm seeing that's coming out of Columbus that is top notch.
Yeah.
And I'm going to write the best review I can and push that film and get people to see it, because I feel that's what I need to do, is to help the people who look like they've really got it going.
Sure.
And they don't need me to.
But what do you do?
Pump Thor.
But what do you do for the people that their work is not so good and doesn't even
I would write a
necessarily show
review.
potential?
If you want to come down and sit down with me and talk to me about your film, I'll say, Kelly, you know that thing you did about the snoring? That was pretty cute, you know? And, okay, that's for the camera. Now, Kelly?
Let's talk about how you can do that better.
Yeah.
But sometimes you are. But sometimes you are handed reviews, and I, like, for example, when I worked on Film Threat, you just got a stack of DVDs or VHSs back in the day, and you'd reviewed them, and you just had to cover them. You couldn't sit there and say, "Well, you couldn't only give out good reviews."
Right, but he's differentiated.
That's different. If you're in a local
local
community and you're really trying to help foster awareness, that's a different approach.
Right.
Well,
I mean,
if you're a teacher, you review them all. You mean, and if there's a student who showed me a student film, and I say, you know, Kevin, that's really pretty awful. Let's talk to you about how we can make a better film. But I wouldn't review that in public. I wouldn't say that to you in public.
right.
Go back to Boston.
But that brings up a great, perfect segue into, how do you feel like the internet has affected criticism? I mean, do you feel
Change the face of it, actually.
It's changed the face of everything.
Some people have a face for the internet.
Well, yeah. Ooh. Or Facebook.
or they have a book of faces, or
Yeah, whatever.
Back
It's
10,
changed
15 years ago, it was print, and that was it.
Mm-hmm.
Even 10 years ago, a lot of internet journalists could not even get into screenings, and nobody cared. Now, of course, anybody getting any press would want it. You know, independent filmmakers. Once the internet showed up, independent filmmakers jumped on that as quickly as possible. But print is dying, if not dead already. and print people are letting go of their print journalists and their print reviewers, or hiring then freelancers at a much lower rate and that sort of thing.
You know, that's too bad too, because print should be alive too. There's room for all of it. I think.
Well, yeah,
I think
but it's a
mistake,
production. It's a production cost thing. That's why. It's because it's a lot cheaper to hit enter and publish on WordPress than it is to print out 10,000 copies of a newspaper.
And you might reach potentially 1 million people with your WordPress.
Yeah.
It's like I appreciate everybody giving me their time and giving me your thoughts. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you all.